now 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and you have joined the 2020 Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program Solicitation webinar. To allow for additional sign-ins past the hour, we will be starting this webinar in a few minutes. Wanted to take the time to go over a few housekeeping items. Anytime during the webinar, you can ask a question by typing it into the question and answer or Q&A panel at the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. This includes both technical and content-related questions. We will try to reply to technical questions in the chat window as we go. For the content-related questions, we will keep a running list and address them at the end of the webinar. We will do our best to get through as many questions as possible. If you have encountered any audio or technical problems during the webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support. I will put the number for that in the chat box. And we will be recording this webinar in case you would like to share it with colleagues or re-listen at a later date.
Hello, everyone. My name is Becky Rose. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor here at BJA, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the fiscal year 2020 Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program Funding Opportunities webinar. As most of you know who are participating on this webinar today, the solicitation was released on March 19th. And we are very pleased to be able to join you all to talk about the solicitation today and answer any questions that you have. So thanks all for joining the webinar. Really great to see all this interest in the program, and we're really excited to be able to offer this funding opportunity once again this year. So joining me on the webinar today are my esteemed colleagues from the Justice Department. I have Maria Fryer, who's a policy advisor at BJA, John Higgins, who's Associate Deputy Attorney General with the Office of Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice, and Sarah Wurzburg, Program Director at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. So really happy you'll hear from all of those folks today, be able to ask us all questions as well. You can go to the next slide. So today, our agenda is as follows. We're going to just give you a quick overview of the funding opportunity, just give you some basics about what the Justice and Mental Health Program is all about. We're going to talk a little bit about the solicitation priority areas. If you guys have read the solicitation yet, you'll notice that there's very specific focus areas for this year's solicitation. We'll talk to you a little bit about the solicitation priorities, and then give you a couple of tips about key criteria to consider as you're preparing your application. We'll share with you some other helpful resources, and then I'm going to wrap up and talk a little bit about additional funding opportunities for you, because I know Many of you on this call are here to hear about, or here on the call to hear about the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, but we have a number of other different funding opportunities that you all might be interested that relate to your work. So this link here is where the solicitation is available. We'll probably mention this a couple of times, but applications are due May 18th, 2020. Just a quick note that we have gotten some initial questions about whether or not we're going to have any extensions around that due to our current pandemic. As of right now, there's no plans to extend it, but if for any reason things change around that, we will be sure to let you know as soon as any updates are made. But as of right now, please consider May 18th the due date. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned in the agenda, I'm going to give you an overview of the funding opportunity, kind of the big picture, how is this program funded, and what are the key, the core kind of functions of the program as well. Next slide, please. So a bit of background on the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Our mission statement is here, but we are to provide leadership and services in grant administration and criminal justice policy development with the main goal of supporting local, state, and tribal justice strategies to achieve safer communities. If you're not familiar with BJA, definitely encourage you to go to the bja.gov to learn more about us. One of the most important things about our website right now is our funding opportunities page. Very long list of different solicitations that are open, but obviously you can learn more about BJA and all the things that we do beyond justice and mental health through this link right here. Next slide. So the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, this program, the kind of core function of this program is to support cross-system collaboration to improve our responses, our public safety responses and outcomes for individuals with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse who come in contact with the criminal justice system. Next slide. I'm not going to read all this here, and you'll see this stated and linked in the solicitation as well, but our statutory authority, we are authorized by actually 3 different statutes. The Mentally Ill Offender Treatment and Crime Reduction Act, often referred to as MIOCRA. If you've been working around in this program in this area for a long time, everybody knows MIOCRA. It was reauthorized in 2008. And then we had several of our, the MIOCRA definitions and a couple of different things that were mentioned and changed a little bit in the 21st Century Cures Act, which the public code is referenced here. Next slide. Eunice, if you can go to the next slide. I don't know if it's a little bit slow. Okay, great. Thank you. So the funding history, it's important to share this information with you. Again, if you're new to JMHCP or you've never applied to this program before, it has been around for a long time. So you can see here since 2006, we have actually funded 531 grantees, to be exact, across 49 states and 2 U.S. territories. So there is a significant amount of funding out there under this such important topic. It's been about over $145 million awarded with award amounts based on the different priorities of each year's solicitation ranging from $50,000 to $750,000. It's interesting to look at the history of a program when you're preparing an application just because you can see what has been done in the past, what's been successful, how you might be able to learn from what's been done in the past, and also just kind of where and how these grants have been awarded in the past. It doesn't necessarily impact, how we award things in this year or future years, but it's always interesting to see, especially for a program that's been around for so long and so successful. So this link here is actually, when you get the slides after this presentation, this is a link to just a 2-pager overview of the program. It gives you a little bit more specifics about the funding history and the different types of programs that we've funded before. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to start digging in a little bit on the solicitation. The eligibility for this year are for states, units of local government, federally recognized Indian tribal governments as determined by the Secretary of the Interior, There's more detail about that if you need it in the actual solicitation or linked from the solicitation, so please refer to the solicitation, but eligibility is actually stated on the cover page. And we also have the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide, which is linked throughout the solicitation, which provides information and definitions around eligibility as well. Important thing about eligibility for this program in particular is that BJA will only accept applications that demonstrate the proposed project will be administered jointly by an agency with responsibility for criminal or juvenile justice activities and a mental health agency. So it's important for you to be aware of that. We'll talk a little bit about what the application, the different focus areas within the solicitation this year, but per the legislation, authorizing legislation, we are looking for applications that demonstrate that partnership between criminal justice and mental health agencies. Next slide. Great, thank you. So there's actually 2 grant phases built in, and again, this is per the authorizing legislation. So while we have 2 phases, we're calling them, this is actually, you're going to just submit 1 application. But per the legislation, we look for applications and grant programs that utilize both a planning phase and an implementation phase. So you must submit 1 application that proposes detailed activities for both a planning phase and an implementation phase. The planning phase can be up to 12 months and up to $100,000 of the total budget. The purpose of a planning phase in the past has really just been kind of to get your partnership together because it does require that strong partnership between criminal justice and mental health. The planning phase really gives you that time to get those partnerships together and figure out how you're going to work together before you kind of transition into the implementation phase. So we're very flexible of what this looks like, but it is something, you know, that we do have built into it, and we want to see that there's activities described for both the planning and implementation phase as it fits, you know, your project's needs or your applicant's needs. One other thing we are very specific about the language, up to 12 months and up to $100,000. That just is, we're giving you that flexibility. So we don't have to have a planning phase that is exactly 12 months. You know, as you're putting your application together and you're beginning to start working with your partners, you guys can determine what's the best amount of time for your planning phase and the best amount of budget for your planning phase. The implementation phase is just the remainder of the grant period once the planning phase has completed. If we can go to the next slide. Great. So for this year's solicitation, the anticipated award and funding amounts. For each award, our estimate award amount is up to $750,000. The total amount anticipated to be awarded is up to $19 million, and the estimate number of awards is 25. You can do the math there. That's where we got this number from. We have about $19 million available for this program to give out to grants through this program, and so that's where we've come up with the estimate number of awards. The period of performance is up to 36 months. I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself when I continue to say up to, but that is because we've built in a lot of flexibility for you guys. So as you start to think about which purpose area might be the best fit for you, you know, and putting together your budget, you have the flexibility to put together a budget up to $750,000. But if you don't need to apply for that much, that's okay. So you know, based on what your needs are and what purpose area you're applying for, you have that flexibility to put in a budget, obviously up to that cap. And then period of performance as well, we do think, you know, with a $750,000 budget, typically would, you know, take about 36 months for successful implementation, just based on past year's grants experiences. But again, based on your budget and your different activities and deliverables that you propose, you have that flexibility to build in a timeline for up to 36 months. Next slide. Great, so now we're gonna transition into kind of the meat of the solicitation. And as I've mentioned throughout my presentation, we have 3 very specific focus areas of this year's solicitation. So I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague, Maria Fryer, to start talking about those focus areas. Maria?
Great. Thank you so much, Becky. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Maria Fryer, and I'm a policy analyst for the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Discretionary Grant Program, or commonly known as the JMHCP. And I work in the policy office at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, also known as BJA. And I am so happy to work with states, tribes, and local governments as they enhance and improve responses to people with mental illness, substance use, co-occurring disorders, and some of my initiatives actually involve intellectual and developmental disability as well. And I oversee a number of programs and cooperative agreements pertaining to the intersection of the criminal justice system and people in need of treatment and services and public safety overall. The Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program is one very well-known program that does all those things and is legislated to improve system-wide responses at the state and local levels in everyday practice and policy development. And at BJA, we work to provide the best possible guidance and practice through our products, resources, and training and technical assistance. We are a small staff dedicated to translating best and promising practices into quality policies and programs for practitioners and the people they serve. Next slide, Eunice. Thank you. So in this solicitation, we have 3 categories or purpose areas of funding. Each purpose area has a unique competition ID. And we've talked a little bit about the purpose of JMHCP, and there are in these 3 distinct areas, each one has a description of in the solicitation as far as what is under that purpose area. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, BJA will only accept applications that demonstrate the proposed project will be administered jointly with an agency responsible for criminal or juvenile justice activities and a mental health agency under these categories. Next slide. So jumping into Purpose Area 1, embedding clinicians in law enforcement agencies. First, let me start by saying for any of the purpose areas that we're about to talk about, the solicitation states that the applicant must propose programming that is consistent with the goals and activities of the authorizing legislation. And you can find this described in the solicitation in pages 4 through 6. This first purpose area allows for social workers and or mental health professionals to be placed in law enforcement agencies to assist officers during encounters with people in mental health crisis. Applicants under this purpose area can use funding to pay for salaries as well as other expenses such as training and other coordination activities to ensure implementation of the collaborative program. To receive priority consideration under Purpose Area 1, applicants can agree to one or more of a series of special conditions on their award, and we'll cover these shortly in the next section. Next slide, please. So Purpose Area 2, support for mental health centers. This purpose area funds operational expenses for centers that provide assistance to those with severe mental health needs who are at risk for recidivism. These mental health centers can provide, but are not limited to, the following services: crisis care, residential treatment, outpatient mental health and primary care services, and community reentry supports. A note from page 6 of the solicitation: when appropriate, use validated assessment tools to target offenders with moderate or high risk for recidivism, and also a need for treatment services. When prioritizing individuals with behavioral health needs in the justice system for scarce programming and treatment resources, priority should be given to those at higher risk for recidivism and higher criminogenic need, as determined by validated actuarial that's a big word, risk and need assessment. So now I would like to introduce to you John Higgins from the Office of the Deputy Attorney General, who would like to talk more about Purpose Area 3. So now I'm going to hand it over to John.
Thank you, Maria. Eunice, next slide, please. Good afternoon, everyone. The Attorney General prioritized disruption and early engagement programs nationally in October of 2019. This Purpose Area 3 in this grant opportunity is tailored specifically to support that national priority. For those of you who are unaware, disruption and early engagement programs offer an additional tool to combat and prevent targeted acts of violence. The programs are complementary to traditional prosecution, and by that I mean that the programs are not an alternative to prosecution. This is not simply diversion. Rather, the programs overlay the traditional prosecution framework. So, if there's a viable criminal charge that can disrupt or deter the threat of violence that's posed by a particular subject, well, then prosecutors should pursue that charge. Such a prosecution still, though, may require crafting conditions of pretrial or supervised release that are tailored to that individual. On the other hand, there may be cases where criminal charges simply are not viable, perhaps because there's a lack of evidence or because a target has not taken a substantial step toward committing a crime. It could also be that the charges that are available just aren't sufficient to deter the nature of the threat posed by that individual. So in any of those instances, we need other options to mitigate the threat. Disruption and early engagement programs emphasize working collaboratively with trained professionals to conduct a threat assessment on such targets and to develop an individualized plan to mitigate the risks that they pose. This requires input from a network of others that may include government officials or clinical experts or community members. So the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI should lead and coordinate the program in each district. But these programs require the input of community stakeholders and the expertise of professionals. And that's where Purpose Area 3 of this grant comes in. It provides a source of funding for the mental health professionals and experts who are central to these programs. So what are we looking for in applicants under this Purpose Area 3? Well, first, as Becky mentioned earlier, the applicant must be a state or a unit of local government or a federally recognized Indian tribal government. If a school system is part of a local unit of government, that would also qualify. And second, you should be partnered up with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI in a disruption and early engagement program in your district. So for participants in the webinar today who are from the U.S. Attorney's Offices, be sure and reach out to your state and local partners about this grant opportunity if you haven't already. We'll have a summary description of disruption and early engagement programs that will be available among the materials following the webinar. But we're looking forward to seeing how applicants put these funds to use in support of disruption and early engagement programs that are tailored to the circumstances they face in their districts. Thanks. Maria, I'm passing the baton back to you.
Thanks, John. That's great. Really appreciate that information. Okay, so next we're going to jump into solicitation priorities. Thanks, Eunice. Program-specific priorities. In FY2020, or fiscal year 2020, priority considerations will be given to the applications that promote effective strategies by law enforcement to identify and reduce the risk of harm to individuals with mental illness or co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse, and public safety. Also, priority consideration will be given to those that promote effective strategies for identification and treatment of female offenders with mental illness or co-occurring disorders. Those that promote effective strategies to expand the use of mental health courts and related services, and those that propose interventions that have been shown by empirical evidence to reduce recidivism. When appropriate, use validated assessment tools to target offenders with moderate or high risk for recidivism and a need for treatment services. And also, priority will be given to those that propose to establish a local working group or multidisciplinary threat assessment and threat management team comprised of law enforcement officials, prosecutors, mental health officials, threat assessment professionals, intervention team, subject matter experts, and community groups to detect and mitigate local threats of violence. These local working groups are strongly encouraged to consult with their local U.S. Attorney's Office and also the FBI Field Division, just as John mentioned in the previous slide. Next, we'll talk about OJP's policy priority areas. Thanks, Eunice. So if you refer to pages 6 through 8 in the solicitation, you'll see more about OJP's policy priority areas. And these priority areas, or priority considerations, equal additional points in your application or in the scoring process. Receipt of priority consideration does not guarantee that an application will be funded, nor does it guarantee the failure to receive priority consideration necessarily doesn't mean that an application will not be funded. In addition to any program-specific prioritization, OJP policy priority areas are applications from federally recognized tribes, applications that address specific challenges that rural communities face, applications that demonstrate that individuals who are intended to benefit from the requested grant reside in high poverty areas or persistent poverty counties, applications that offer enhancements to public safety in economically distressed communities known as qualified opportunity zones, applications for Purpose Area 1 that go to enhancing criminal justice and public safety by indicating agreement to comply with one or more of the following law enforcement related award conditions. And this is where we were referring back to our Purpose Area 1. So these specifically refer to Purpose Area 1, where the application is from a state or local government entity that operates at least one correctional facility, applications in which the applicant agrees to comply with the award conditions related to cooperation with federal law enforcement as set forth in Appendix B. And in the back of the solicitation, there are several appendices, and Appendix B refers to this one particular priority consideration for Purpose Area 1. The next one is where the application is from a state or local government entity, applications in which the applicant agrees to comply with the award conditions related to non-interference with federal law enforcement as set forth in Appendix C. And the third is where the application is from a state or local government entity, applications in which the applicant agrees to comply with award conditions related to non-disclosure of federal law enforcement information as set forth in Appendix D. So that's a lot of information. I would encourage you to look back at Purpose Area 1 again and then flip to the back of the solicitation to review those certifications. Next slide is the key criteria for consideration. And we'll start with match. So this solicitation does require match. It can be cash or in kind. And regarding match, match is the amount of cash or in kind services or resources that are federally allowable that when added to the federal award makes up the total budget. This is the portion that the applicant brings to the project and makes up the total budget. For JMHCP, the amount or percentage of match increases over the 36-month project period into year 3. The financial guide, or the federal financial guide, is located on page 18. There's a checklist within the solicitation, and it's also located in several other places throughout the solicitation, and it is the best guide for learning more about allowable sources of match. Please note that while applicants will be required to submit a budget for the entire 36-month project at the time of application submission, applicants may have the opportunity to revise their budget
This is Becky Rose. I just want to confirm. It sounds like we may have lost Maria. Sarah or Eunice, can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Becky. Thank you.
Okay, great. If somebody could send Maria a message to let her know that I'm just going to take over from here, and we'll move on. Thanks, everybody, for that. Okay, so I think the most important thing about this slide is just to point out that the OJP Financial Guide provides you a lot of good resources about calculating a match. So that link is here. Also, the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide also includes actually example calculations, how to actually calculate your match. So it gives you some of those nice calculations that we're probably helping our kids with, during homeschool and math these days, but it helps you kind of walk you through how to calculate that match. So definitely encourage you to take a look at the financial guide and the OJP application resource guide as well. If we can go to the next slide. So here, what we see here is the different application elements. And why we're pointing this out, this is all from the solicitation. But we know these solicitations are long and sometimes, hard to read. One thing I always like to point out is that, we encourage a number of read-throughs through the solicitation to try to pick up on all the different requirements. We do try to make it as easy as possible for you guys, but there are a number of requirements that we do have to build in. So application elements. You can see here we've kind of got a checklist for you. There's also a checklist at the back of the solicitation to help you guide you through, before you're actually clicking that submit button to make sure you have all the important elements. But we have the application form SF424, and that's described and linked in the solicitation. That will actually be prompted when you're in grants.gov to actually fill out that form. The other kind of pieces that you're putting together are the program abstract, the program narrative, the budget information, which includes a budget detail and the budget narrative. That's actually all linked for you into one nice template that you can use. Some of the other things that we do require, the indirect cost rate agreement, financial management questionnaire, and there are several disclosures, if applicable, listed here and also in the solicitation. Some other things that we do ask that you provide to us are the task timeline. So earlier in the presentation I mentioned that you have that kind of flexibility to present to us a grant timeline for up to 36 months. This is where you're going to give us an estimate of what the different activities for those 36-month period would look like. We also ask for resumes and position descriptions for the key staff that are going to be involved in the project. Any MOUs and letters of support. And why this is important is because, as we discussed at the beginning of this presentation, we do require that there's a partnership between a criminal justice entity and a mental health partner. So, showing that partnership has been established or discussed at least through MOUs or letters of support is key. Now, I want to point out, I know we often get this question, is MOUs sometimes take time to get through the process and approved. So it doesn't have to be an MOU. A letter of support is definitely acceptable for this application. And then proposed subrecipients as well. There's very specific guidance on what subrecipients can look like, but that's often for this program, especially because we do require that partnership. We can only accept one application, an application from one entity, I should say, but we know that there's going to be subrecipients because of the partnership required. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so within the solicitation, we actually provide guidance to you on how we think you should prepare your application package. And so as we've noted in the solicitation, all of our applications will go through a peer review process. And so the peer reviewers are actually receiving guidance on how to rate the application materials that you submit. So if you were to look at page 14 on the solicitation, it starts on page 14. This is where we provide very detailed information about the review criteria. And for each section, we have each section weighted. And the reason we give a weight is because this is the guidance that we're giving to the peer reviewers to say, okay, review this, look to see that they include all information, and then they score that section, and then with that score is weighted for that section, and then come up with an overall score for the application. So we share that information with you. We tell you, which sections are weighted what. So you can see description of the issue is at 15%, project design and implementation is at 40%, capabilities and competencies at 30%, the plan for collecting the solicitation's performance measures and sustainability plans at 5%, and the budget at 10%. So if you were to look at this and see where you really want to invest your time when you're pulling your applications together, you look at the most heavily weighted sections, the project design and implementation and capabilities and competencies. That's part of your program narrative, and that's where we would expect a great amount of detail. And that's all laid out in the review criteria starting on page 4. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to give you a couple of other helpful resources, and I think I'm going to transition it to Sarah. If we can go to the next slide. Great. So one quick thing, Sarah, before I turn it over to you, we through the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, we are authorized statutorily to provide what we call training and technical assistance. If you guys have never kind of heard of that term or you're unsure what that means, what it is we build up a kind of a support network of people who can help you successfully implement your project. So as a JMHCP grantee, you will receive a variety of different services through our training and technical assistance provider, which is the Council of State Governments Justice Center. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. As Becky mentioned, my name is Sarah Wurzberg. I'm a program director for behavioral health at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and I oversee the training and technical assistance to the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program. So right now, we are privileged to be able to work with the 126 active Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program grantees. And we look forward to supporting the new awardees for fiscal year 20. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the Council of State Governments Justice Center. The Justice Center is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that combines the power of a membership association representing state and local officials in all 3 branches of government with the expertise of a policy and research team focused on assisting others to attain measurable results. Our staff develops research-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. We strive to reflect the Justice Center's core values, which include a commitment to being independent and nonpartisan in every aspect of our work, providing rigorous, trusted, high-quality analyses, developing practical and innovative solutions informed by data and research, promoting collaboration and building consensus, being inclusive and respectful of diverse views and experience. As an organization, we focus on a range of areas within the justice system. We pride ourselves in having a deep understanding of the experience of the people on the front line of the justice system and our ability to gather people from both sides of the aisle and across the country to foster collaboration. We promote smart and effective policy and practice changes through our work as the training and technical assistance provider for the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program. Next slide, please. So as a Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program recipient, each grantee is assigned a TA coach who will help you throughout the life of the grant period. They really are a coach to help answer questions, to cheer you on as you start planning and implementing your programs, and to support you in any ways that we can. The TA coaches host monthly calls for each of the sites where you can answer questions and help you connect with resources. They're kind of an air traffic controller who really helps connect you with various different things throughout the time of your grant. We're able to provide specific planning support and answer questions on a variety of topics, including who you might be missing on your advisory group or larger planning committee. What types of other services should you consider that other grantees in your purpose area are focusing on? We're also able to support implementation in a variety of ways, including helping with recommendations on some training opportunities and also support of implementation of evidence-based practice, data collection, and evaluation efforts. We are able to do site visits for a select group of grantees where we're able to come on site for a couple of days and do some more intensive training in technical assistance. A big part of our work is really peer learning, connections to past and current justice and mental health collaboration program grantees, along with law enforcement mental health learning sites, the criminal justice mental health learning sites, and the Stepping Up Innovator counties. There's a whole bunch of other sites around the country who are trying to do this work, or have already started implementing, that we would be excited to connect you with. We also have learning communities on a variety of topics. And those are really a way to bring in experts from the field and to bring in some of your peers to talk in smaller groups on really critical topics, such as high utilizers of the mental health, the substance use, the homeless, and the justice system. We provide access to experts through our sub-award contracts with different experts around the country on a variety of topics, including data collection and evaluation, gender-responsive services for women, trauma-informed care, and many more topics. Another piece of what we do is we listen to grantees about your key challenges, and then based on that, we're able to develop resources that will try to answer those questions as best as we can in real time. So we have a number of resources and tools available on our website, and we encourage you to look at those. They might be helpful in your application process. I'm going to turn it back over to Becky now. Thank you.
Great, Sarah. Thank you so much. And I wanted just to kind of reemphasize a couple of the points that Sarah made, is that there are a lot of resources on our website. And you know, as you recall, when I talked about the history of the program, this program has been around since 2006 in terms of giving grant money out to state, local, and tribal entities. So a lot of good information has been shared, not only about success of our grantees and how they've gone about these collaborative mental health and criminal justice projects, but also just a bunch of resources, ideas. If you guys are looking for ideas, you know, you have a baseline of what you want to do, but you want to see how to expand upon it. There's a lot of different publications and other resources available through the Council of State Governments Justice Center as well. Thank you, Sarah. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of other help, what we think could be some helpful resources, and then I'll wrap up by talking about some other solicitations or funding opportunities, and then we'll go to Q&A. So just a few minutes longer, and then we'll get to your questions. Just as a reminder, you guys can type in your questions in the Q&A chat box, and we'll read the questions out loud from there. So another resource I just wanted to make you aware of earlier. It was actually back in November or December of 2019. BJA hosted a webinar as part of our grant applicant web education series, but it was called the Federal Funding Process, the First Steps to Applying, How to Prepare, and Other Considerations. If any of you on this call have not applied for federal funding or have not applied to BJA or Office of Justice Programs funding before, definitely encourage you to take a look at this. You can see the transcript and the PDF of the webinar available at this link. It's just a helpful tool to kind of walk through what should you be paying attention to. There's a lot of different things that you need to do to get ready to submit an application through grants.gov, which is the vehicle for which we accept applications through JMHCP. Some of that is detailed in the solicitation, the JMHCP solicitation, and also the accompanying resources or the links. But this webinar that we did earlier in the fiscal year really kind of takes you a step-by-step process through that grants.gov registration and other helpful tips as well when putting together your application. So I encourage you to take a look at that as you're preparing your application, especially if you're first time applying. Next slide, please. Okay, a lot of links here, so obviously don't write them down, but you've heard me mention a couple of times the OJP Funding Resource Center. This is definitely something you want to bookmark. You'll see it linked throughout the solicitation. I think it's actually referred to, or I'm actually referencing also the OJP Application Resource Guide, which is the fourth bullet down here. But the point of providing all of these links is there's a lot of information that's we've linked from the solicitation, and that will be very helpful to you as you're pulling together your application materials. So the DOJ Grants Financial Guide, if you have questions about allowable costs, the financial guide or what those costs might look like, the financial guide will be able to answer some of those questions for you. There is a financial management online training. If you're a grantee, you would take this course, but as preparing for applicants, it does give you some tips on this page. As I mentioned already, the 2020 OJP Grant Application Resource Guide. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with our solicitations in years past. We've had a lot of, they've actually been longer. This year's is definitely shorter, which is great for you all. And so, but where we kind of link a lot of that information about guidance is through this Grant Application Resource Guide. So this will give you a lot more detail about, what are the kind of nuts and bolts on submitting an application, at this resource guide. And then we've included nijcrimesolution.gov. This is just a resource for you if you're looking for ideas about, different programming you want to put together. There's a number of different, a lot of different programs listed on this website just to help generate ideas. So you may have your partners at the table, but you're really looking to kind of build on, what you might want to do. This is just one of those resources to help you think about what's out there and what's been done successfully in the past. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so a lot of this is linked in the solicitation, but just important to point them out for you, some important contacts for you. So grants.gov, again, this is actually the vehicle where you're going to submit your application. So you need to make sure you're very familiar with what is required to become registered with grants.gov. There are a number of different steps that are laid out in the OJP resource guide that talks about DUNS numbers and all those important numbers, administrative numbers, and administrative steps that you need to do to become registered with grants.gov. I cannot emphasize this point enough now. Do get set up in grants.gov now. Make sure that your organization, if you're going to be the applicant, is already registered with grants.gov and you have the ability to submit an application. So start that process now. Don't wait a week before the deadline. Don't wait 2 weeks before the deadline. Do that now. But if you have questions, the grants.gov customer support hotline is here. They also have a number of resources on grants.gov that kind of helps you walk you through that process as well. And then NCJRS, the National Criminal Justice Reference Service, you'll see this this number linked on the page 2 of the solicitation. This is going to be your central point for questions. So if you have questions about the solicitation after our webinar, you can call this number. This is kind of our solicitation office hours. This is a number that you can call, and either they'll be able to address, whoever in the call center address the question you have, or refer it to one of us to be able to get a response back to you as soon as possible. But this is your kind of one-stop shop for additional solicitation questions. Next slide, please. Okay, so become an application peer reviewer. I always like to include a slide like this, or we always do in our presentations, because again, if you're kind of new to the federal funding process, or you're submitting an application for the first time, or you're not quite ready this year to submit an application, but you're learning more about it, one great way to learn about kind of the peer review process is to become a peer reviewer. Now, if you're submitting, I'll just point out right away, if you're submitting an application under JMHCP, you cannot be a peer reviewer for JMHCP. Pretty obvious, but I want to make sure to point that out. But I've mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there's so many other different programs, funding opportunities that BJA administers. So if you are interested in learning more about the process, it helps you just to understand and prepare applications for future years. Definitely encourage you to become a peer reviewer. It's a great experience. So the information is here about how you would put your name in the hat to become a peer reviewer. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about additional funding opportunities. I'm going to throw a lot at you in terms of what's out there and other funding opportunities. But again, one of your most important things to explore if you're looking for other opportunities or you don't quite fit within one of these focus areas under JMHCP this year, is the bja.gov and the available funding tab at the top. But let's go to the next slide and I'll talk about a couple of these for you today. So a new initiative that kicked off this year is the Collaborative Mental Health and Anti-Recidivism Initiative. This solicitation is currently open and it closes May 22nd. But this purpose of this program is to enhance services for individuals with serious mental illness in prisons by developing a pilot program that will establish a comprehensive service delivery plan focusing on these things: therapeutic, vocational, cognitive, behavioral, and other mental health treatment needs of prison inmates from intake or arrests through their reentry and probationary parole periods. This is a very specific solicitation, obviously aligns very closely with the core purpose of JMHCP, but under the solicitation, only states are eligible to apply. There must be a demonstrated partnership between a Department of Corrections and a Department of Mental Health or Mental Behavioral Health Services, however it functions within your state. And we are actually only planning to make one award to a state for a pilot program under this Collaborative Mental Health and Anti-Recidivism Initiative. But if you are with a state agency and this seems like a good fit for you, there's up to $1 million available. So it's definitely a good opportunity to take a look at. Next slide. Again, related to the JMHCP program, our partners at the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention program have released a solicitation, which is called the Juvenile Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program. Aligns very nicely with JMHCP, but focuses obviously on juveniles. But this program is to support proposals to develop and implement a cross-system collaborative approach to improve responses and outcomes for youth with mental illness or co-occurring disorders who come in contact with the juvenile justice system. So this obviously is solely focused on the juvenile justice system, but definitely encourage you. The solicitation is open right now. You can see that it closes a little bit earlier than JMHCP, but a great opportunity for you all if you are working with the juvenile justice population to be able to apply for collaborative efforts under this juvenile solicitation. Next slide. Another significant initiative, somewhat relevant to maybe some of the work that you all are doing or embarking on, is our Preventing School Violence, BJ's Stop School Violence program. This solicitation is currently open and closes June 9th. Through this program, we are looking to improve school security by providing students and teachers with the tools they need to recognize, respond quickly to, and help prevent acts of violence. So definitely encourage you to take a look at this. There's a couple categories within the Stop School Violence Prevention solicitation this year. Some of it may be relevant to, addressing, encounters with persons with mental illness or providing treatment services, things like that. So I definitely encourage you all to take a look at this if you're looking specifically to work with school population and or school safety security matters. Next slide. So I'm sharing with you the Adult Drug Court and Veterans Treatment Court Discretionary Grant Program. This program, if you've been in this world for a long time, ever worked with drug courts, it's been around. This funding opportunity has been around for quite a long time. So many of you may be familiar with this, but the reason I wanted to mention it is an opportunity to look at funding for courts potentially. So for those of you that are working with a population of co-occurring disorders, so both mental illness and substance abuse, this might be an opportunity for you to look at. That's an allowable use of the funds, again, for co-occurring population with co-occurring disorders. But this program provides funding to enhance the operations of drug courts and implement new veterans treatment courts. So definitely take a look at that. I have this closing date of May 14th. I know there was just a update to the drug court solicitation, so make sure to look at that link or go to bja.gov's webpage to look at the latest on the drug court solicitation. That date might be inaccurate, but make sure to take a look at what the latest is for that drug court solicitation. Next slide. Okay, the Innovations in Community-Based Crime Reduction Program. We often refer to this as CBCR, but this is funding to reduce serious and violent crime, including gun violence, gang activity, addressing gang activity, and strengthening local capacity to prevent or to combat drug abuse. But this is really about community-driven activities to address those issues, to address violent crime. But the purpose of CBCR is to help communities build trust and support law enforcement agencies working with these communities by integrating enforcement strategies into community-based crime reduction efforts and using this information to understand and target the issues. So again, really focused on the community work and addressing violent crime. The closing date right now is June 11th for that. Definitely take a look at the solicitation if you're looking at some, targeted community-based work, especially in the area of violent crime. Next slide. Okay. So that is just a snapshot of some of the different funding opportunities that are open right now. Again, on our bja.gov website, there are a number of different funding opportunities that definitely encourage you to take a look at. Now we will kind of shift focus back to JMHCP, and we've linked the solicitation here for you again. Again, we'll get the slides out to you. Applications are due on May 18th, and we are going to transition right now to Q&A. And just a reminder, if you guys have questions, please go ahead and type them. I see a number of questions in there, so we look forward to getting to those. But if you have questions, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A box, and our colleague Sarah will help us navigate and get through the questions. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. So we've had over 30 questions already. So some of the questions have common themes. So I've tried to combine some of the questions together. So for those who are listening, if you don't hear your exact question, just listen for the key areas, as some folks have repeated similar questions, and we've attempted to combine those for the sake of ease of our panelists here. Okay, so to begin with, on the first page of the funding announcement, it states all recipients and subrecipients, including any for-profit organization, must forego any profit or management fee. Does this mean administrative costs are not allowed?
So I'll go ahead and take this. So administrative costs are allowed. So indirect costs or overhead costs are an allowable expense under this program. This is really about focusing on those profit, that word profit, and gaining profit around any of these funds. So absolutely, indirect costs, for example, are allowed. Definitely refer to the financial guide for additional guidance on allowable costs kind of in those administrative cost category. Thanks.
Great. So there was a couple of questions on whether nonprofit contractors can be applicants. So I'm going to divide this into two parts. One, can nonprofits be applicants? And two, if a nonprofit is a contractor of a state mental health authority or a law enforcement agency, would they be considered a potential applicant?
So nonprofits are not an eligible applicant. Just as a reminder, the eligible applicants are states, units, or local government or federally recognized Indian tribal governments. And then in terms of the contractor question, they would not be eligible applicants unless they are designated as a state or local agency by the state or local entity. So if they are a contractor, I may be making some assumptions about this question, but if they are a contractor, working with the state or local entity, but still serving in that contract role, they would not be an eligible applicant. They would have to, work with the state or unit of local government to submit the application.
Thank you. So there were a few questions regarding this as well. So for the appendices B and C, there's a mention of information sharing with federal agencies in regard to illegal immigrants. If a state or local government has some type of restriction on their ability to share this information, such as a sanctuary state government about immigration information, does that prevent them from applying for this grant program?
This is Maria. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because I dropped off the call earlier. I'm so sorry. Reception wasn't too good earlier. So just to, this question is pretty much summed up within the solicitation, it says receipt of priority consideration does not guarantee that an application will be funded, nor will the failure to receive priority consideration necessarily mean that an application will not be funded. So that refers to the certifications in the back of the solicitation and specifically to Purpose Area 1. That's something that the applicant agrees to a special condition that is applied in the event that they're awarded. It doesn't mean that you cannot apply. You can apply, and those points are specific to that priority consideration that you agree to per those certifications in the back. And just want to add to that if there's additional specific questions regarding eligibility, because this is really around eligibility for so-called sanctuary cities. If somebody else has a question about that out there, we would be happy to discuss those with you individually, and we can share our contact information on the email that goes out when the webinar is concluded. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Maria. Another question is the applicant eligible to claim in-kind costs, or does a third party only apply to a contracted vendor or volunteer?
This is Maria. I can take that one. I think I understand. I might have to ask you to repeat, but off the top, in-kind match is totally acceptable. And as far as third party, I'm not quite sure what's meant by that. So there are, there's an applicant organization and they partner. There's under JMHCP, there's oftentimes multiple subcontracts. And because of all the partnership just inherent in the program, there's lots of partnership and lots of subcontracts. And, as far as the in-kind, that's a resource that's allowable, just as if it were paid for with federal funding. It's a resource or time and service as far as what's being added to the project, and those salaries as far as what's being applied in terms of match. Sarah, I might have to ask you to repeat it because there was a couple parts to that, I think.
Yes, I think that you answered the question. The person had indicated who asked it that the Department of Justice Financial Guide doesn't really explain what third party is considered. So I think their question was related to that. So they were wondering about, specifically the question was, is the applicant eligible to claim in-kind costs, or does third party only apply to a contracted vendor or volunteer?
Okay. I think I might have to get back to them on that and do a little bit of research, but the primary applicant is responsible for identifying in-kind match or cash match for the project. And I think I'd have to do a little digging as far as that definition of third party to really very specifically identify who that is and if they are in-kind can come from that volunteer or that third party. So be sure to reach out and get my contact.
Yes, we can share the contact information.
One thing I just want to point out, match sometimes, especially because it's in-kind or can be in-kind or cash. Sometimes it's, and you've got to calculate it year 1, year 2, year 3. Sometimes it's maybe a little bit challenging. I would definitely refer to the OJP Financial Guide if there's any very particular restrictions around match. Try to adhere to that when you're submitting your application. But as your application is going through the review process, this isn't necessarily something that would kick you out. So it's, we've talked about the critical elements of the application and the, narrative and budget go through a peer review process. If you are selected as a grantee, our our team, Nikisha, is on the line here. She's a part of our grants management team. We'll work really closely with you to make sure that if we need to make any revisions to your budget and or, kind of have you more clearly align or explain the match, and we can do that, at the beginning of the grant and throughout the course of the grant too. So I just wanted to make sure to point that out, that we will work really closely with you if you are selected as a grantee, to make sure your budget is in line with the requirements. But definitely take a look at the financial guide as it relates to any kind of major non-allowable costs. Thanks.
That's a great point, Becky. Thanks.
Okay, are Department of Corrections or Probation and Parole divisions counted as law enforcement agencies under Purpose Area 1 and 3?
Yes.
Okay, so we received another question that's essentially the same question, but with different agencies listed. So I'm just going to slightly repeat this. Are sheriff's offices and prosecutor's offices considered law enforcement agencies?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. How does BJA define mental health centers?
So this is these are referred to as community crisis centers, community behavioral health centers. They are, let's say, community treatment facilities that provide services such as crisis care, long-term care. They help connect people to other types of wraparound services that might be needed to provide ongoing clinical treatment, and coordinate with criminal justice entities and other community partners. I would say we have some resources that might be really helpful, such as the principles document that's put out by SAMHSA around what is considered best practice for community behavioral health centers or crisis centers. We are still, kind of getting best practices out there and growing them. Crisis centers are growing very rapidly, and having best practice out there to help guide what are considered, best practice in community behavioral health centers is definitely important. So I would say refer to the principles guide, and I think we're going to offer that either in the chat or at the end of the webinar to offer further guidance for community behavioral health and centers.
Yes, thank you, Maria. We did share that one in the chat box, and we will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow with some of the additional links that were shared in the chat box, as well as a guidance document from Department of Justice that will help with Purpose Area 3. So people can look out for that tomorrow to the people who registered for this webinar.
Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely. Can you please provide some examples of what planning activities would be?
Sure.
I can jump in here, Maria.
Go ahead,
Maria.
Becky.
Okay.
That's okay.
I'll
Go
just
ahead.
start, and you can add in. So some planning activities might be, really around establishing that collaborative partnership. So obviously you need to have that in place as you submit or when you submit your application. But being able to build on that, partnership that you've discussed in your application. So it could be, establishing that partnership with the key partners on the application, but expanding it, having planning meetings, coordinating meetings, whatever it may be. Another thing that we've seen, for planning activities is in the area of data collection. So if you're, really trying to narrow in the particular population that you're going to work with, or, where you're going to focus your efforts, in terms of the JMHCP funds, you can use that planning time to look at the data, dig in a little bit more to the data in terms of where to target resources. Maria, what would you add to that?
Oh, thanks, Becky. That was great. I would also add activities such as if you're familiar with SIM mapping, sequential intercept mapping, this is a great planning activity that it actually, brings your stakeholders together, just as Becky mentioned, really important in identifying where your strengths are in your community, what's the process and flow of people with mental illness and co-occurring disorders to the justice system, and just kind of identifying where are the gaps, who are the people, where are they, is it, are people flowing to the justice system on the, the front end of the system, are they coming in more through the courts, are they coming in, are they recidivating as they re-enter the community, so that you can better identify where to allocate time and resources and people in terms of your grant awards. So definitely SIM mapping.
Thank you. For applicants who have a current JMHCP planning grant, can the jurisdiction go straight into the implementation phase?
That's a great question. When you say planning grant, is this from a previous year? I'm kind of assuming that this is from a previous funding of JMHCP. Can you go right into implementation? Well, the answer is back to the solicitation. It's a two-phase process. Your planning period might go a little bit faster, and you might not need as much time and resources, but there is a planning phase and there is an implementation phase. So I would just say refer to the solicitation on that.
Great, thank you. Could funding be used for social workers or mental health professionals to be placed in a public defender's office to assist defenders as part of an application under Purpose Area 1 or 2?
That is really, I think, a matter of logistics. Because these are such collaborative programs, I could see it being, I would say in a manner of speaking, you could, but it really is, the intent of it is to help and assist officers. So it would be the social worker or the clinician would be housed inside the law enforcement agency, such as comparative to perhaps a co-responder model. But because these are collaborations and you might have multiple collaborative partners, such as a public defender's office, if the person collaborates and kind of moves between, I guess, you could say potentially, I think you would have to look at the solicitation and kind of look at your needs and your partnership and see how that's going to be set up. But priority Purpose Area 1 really is intended for social workers and clinicians to assist officers from that location.
Thank you. It seems like potentially for the public defenders, it could be a partnership with a mental health center as well under Purpose Area 2 potentially. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, and Sarah, I would just add to that, and as far as all the purpose areas, really it's about aligning your activities and the things that you want to do and your needs with the statute and with the appropriate purpose area. So you almost have to kind of align all three things as you're thinking through, because I know it's hard to answer the question exactly. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But to offer the best guidance I probably could, it would be aligning the activities, the statute, and the purpose area and the solicitation. So kind of think of it that way.
Thank you, Maria. So we received several variations of this question as well, so I'm going to break it up into two parts. Can organizations apply under more than one purpose area? Then if so, do they have two separate applications for this grant program?
So they can apply under more than one purpose area, yes, but yes, it would have to be two separate applications. So we can't see a scenario where you submit one application, but you're applying under purpose area 1 and purpose area 2. If you have interest and need for the different purpose areas, it would be one application per purpose area, and you can apply to multiple purpose areas.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions now related to Purpose Area 3. First one is, for Purpose Area 3, can the offenses be violent offenses under this category?
Short answer is yes. The disruption and early engagement approach focuses on protection of public safety, and that can take many forms. Certainly crimes of violence would be front and center concerning that. But I want to emphasize that this isn't simply diversion. You know, what disruption and early engagement programs envision is a collaborative and creative way to approach cases that don't really fit a typical or a traditional prosecution model, or if that prosecution model just isn't enough to address the threat.
Thank you. And another question on Purpose Area 3. Do jurisdictions have to have partnerships with the FBI and USAO prior to applying to the grant, or can the jurisdiction use this grant to try to build these partnerships?
I would say closer to the latter, but you'll want to reach out to the U.S. Attorney's Office now to find out what it is that they are doing in this area and partner up with them in the grant application process.
Great, thank you so much. Is there a maximum per year budget for the grant? And how does the budget, or is there a specific amount that the budget for years 2 and 3 needs to, or does it say that years 2 and 3 budgets need to be equal? So I guess can the budget years different? Can the amounts differ per year in terms of budget allocation?
Yes, they can. That is up to you about how you want to. Things to point out. One is just a reminder that, you know, for the planning phase, we just asked that it's up to $100,000. And then, you know, we give you kind of the guidance that it would be up to 36 months. But you guys, or you all applicants, can decide how you want to budget the 3-year project if you're proposing a 3-year project. We do not require a certain amount per year.
Thank you. And another related question, how do applicants actually show the increased match in the 3rd year of the budget?
Can you repeat that, Sarah? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Sure, absolutely. This person was wondering how an applicant actually shows the increased match in the year 3 portion of the budget. So I think it's more a question on the budget template and how you show match.
So I might be able to tackle that. So on the template itself, you would show the percentage and show the increase, and you would identify what it is, whether it be cash or in kind, and then the dollar amount should come out to the percentage that's required in the 3rd year of the total budget. But we would help you work through that at the time that your budget's approved. So that part, you know, as far as the logistics of how to correctly show it or annotate it and plug it into the template and say what it is and show the dollar amount and ensure that the percentage is correct, we would help you with that if you had a question at that time.
Thank you. So there is a couple of questions about attachments and supplemental materials for the grant. The first one is there a template for letters of support that the jurisdiction should be using in the application process?
There is not. I actually looked, I saw this question come in while another speaker was talking. This is Becky. And we don't actually have a template anywhere on our OJP application resource guide or kind of our Grants 101 training, where a portion of that talks about how to apply. So we don't have a template for that. So it definitely, up to you all how you want to put that together. Typically what we see in terms of a letter of support is a letter from the chief executive of the agency, indicating that they support the agency being a partner on this project and support the submission of the application. I'm just providing that as kind of what we've seen in the past. That's not required, but that's we don't have a template anywhere, so definitely use your best judgment around that when you're submitting your application. Thanks.
Thank you. And then again on attachments, we had a few people who just wanted to confirm that letters of support, resumes for staff, positions, descriptions, and the task timeline do not count as part of the 20 pages of the narrative, but can be additional attachments in the application.
That is correct. Those are considered additional attachments, would not be counted towards the narrative, program narrative portion of your application.
Great, thank you. So this is another question that came in from multiple people. So just going back to the question previously about nonprofit health partners. So people just wanted to confirm that they would, if they're a nonprofit health partner, they would need to find a state agency or local agency, state agency, local government agency, or tribal nation to partner with on the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program grant. And they're just wondering if they're already partnered with a law enforcement partner, would they actually qualify as an applicant?
Oh, this is Maria. I can take that one. So one, the application has to come from either the criminal justice, the government entity, state, local, tribal, or a state mental health authority. So in many rural communities, the mental health authority does have designated contracts representing the state mental health authority to be able to reach people in rural pockets and communities operating as, the mental health provider under the state. So they are, inextricably linked to the state mental health authority. So those nonprofits are okay to be contractors. They cannot be applicants, but they can be as part of that mental health authority. So it would have to come from either the application has to come from either the government entity or state, local, tribal, or come from the mental health authority in partnership with one another. Did I answer that?
Yes, thank you.
That
you did
great, Maria.
answer that, okay. And I think just a few people had questions on that, so good that we got to circle back in a little bit more detail.
Great.
So there is a couple of questions around within purpose areas, what are allowable uses of funds? So for example, under purpose area 1, people just wanted to confirm if they could only use funds for the co-responder program, or if they would also be able to use funds to support that through case management software, recovery housing, other housing partners, and some of those other wraparound services that would be helpful for a co-responder team.
So embedded in a law enforcement agency, they're going to want to have resources to actually help people. So I would say yes. If it's coming from that social worker position, and we'd have to see on a case-by-case basis. But the social workers, they will partner with outside services and treatment, but in a limited capacity, there could be some line items for services.
And I'll just add to that, Maria. You know, I'll just add, we do have a sentence in there about, you know, under Purpose Area 1 in particular, applicants under this purpose area can use funding to pay for the salaries of those clinicians that are embedded, as well as other expenses such as training or other coordination activities to ensure the implementation of the collaborative program. So that last piece of the sentence, I think, kind of opens it up to you know, you all proposing, you know, different ideas around, you know, embedding clinicians within law enforcement agencies, but then, you know, enhancing or providing those support services to make that partnership and collaborative program a success.
Thank you. Can grant funds be utilized to fund overtime for law enforcement officers assisting mental health clinicians?
Long pause there. I appreciate that question. I think the answer would be yes. There's nothing in the solicitation or authorizing legislation that would preclude that over time. We would just, you know, it would have to be kind of demonstrated as part of the collaborative effort. Maria, anything to add?
I would agree,
okay,
because
great.
I think, Becky, you really summed it up well when you went right back to the solicitation language that talked about training. And that's one of the main reasons why being able to pay, you know, some overtime or some backfill salaries, because if people are going to training, you know, someone else has to be out there to respond along with clinicians. And so it does. It becomes, you know, all part of that collaborative model. And JMHCP, there is nothing that precludes that from happening, because it's very broad for that very reason, because you can customize based on your needs. Everybody's needs are different in 18,000 law enforcement departments. So I'm glad you helped me clarify, Becky. That sounds great.
Are public state universities considered eligible units of state governments for this solicitation?
If it's a state university, yes.
Thank you. One of the participants on the webinar noted that it looks like the performance measures for this grant program are being revised. Should the applicant use the link on the page 11 of the solicitation, which is to 2016 JMHCP measures, to write the evaluation section for this application?
So they are being revised just a bit, excuse me, to align with the focus areas of this year's solicitation. But it's important to note, you know, you can look at the link and see what we've used. I don't expect, you know, significant changes, but yes, they are being revised. When you are writing your narrative, if you were to look at page 15 of the solicitation, section 4 under the review criteria is the plan for collecting the data required for the solicitation's performance measures. The 2 bullet points here are reference kind of what we want you to include in this section. You actually don't need to closely align any of your narrative to the performance measures. So you don't need to go performance measure by performance measure and talk about them. What we want to see in this section is a description of how the data will actually be collected. We want to make sure that you're aware that there's going to be performance metric information collected. We want to make sure that you have a system in place to collect this kind of data. While the data might change as we roll out the implementation of these fiscal year 20 grants, we want to make sure that there's that foundation, that you're kind of, again, awareness of it, and you know that you have a system in place to work with your partners to collect the data that's required. And also, as in the second bullet, it says describe whether and how other relevant performance measures will be documented, monitored, and evaluated. That's an important factor that you can also talk about, is that while we have JMHCP performance metrics, that's not everything that you're going to want to talk about in terms of data for your program, most likely. So there's going to be a lot of other different, data pieces or other areas that you want to evaluate in terms of the performance of your program that might not fit within our BJA performance metrics. So definitely encourage you to explore that and describe that in your narrative as well. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, and this is Maria. I would just add as well, Becky provided a really great overview, and I would add as well in thinking about what data you would like to collect with your project. A lot of that really begins in the planning phase with the planning and implementation guide. And this guide is something that between BJA and our training and technical assistance provider, the Government's State Council of Government's Justice Center, have put together to help, along with your coach, to guide you through the planning process. And a lot of that planning process is really talking about, what types of data would you like to collect, or what do you need to collect to be able to show impact and be able to tell, what the successes were, and really be able to show impact to your community, other stakeholders that are part of your project, and BJA. So I think that's a really important part of the evaluation process, is really where it begins in the planning process as well.
Thank you. And I'm noting the time, so I'm going to ask one last question before we sign off. As we mentioned before, we will be sending some follow-up information tomorrow, and I think the group on this line is certainly happy to make sure all of the other questions get answered as well. This question is one that I think a lot of people might have on their mind, so I just wanted to make sure to get this in on the webinar. Right now, a lot of state and local agencies are focused in responding to the current crises due to COVID-19. Is there a chance that the May 18th deadline will get extended for the application?
Thanks, Sarah, for bringing that up. As of right now, we are not planning to extend the deadline. But I just will say that if you have concerns and you want to share them with us at BJA, please do not hesitate to reach out and let us know. And we will be sure to share that with our leadership. So as Sarah mentioned, she'll share some contact information after, when we send out the materials tomorrow. Please feel free to reach out to us directly, or you can reach to the NCJRS solicitation call center, which is linked in the solicitation, to share concerns that you all have. I appreciate you raising that, and I hope everyone is safe. But at this time, we don't have any plans, but definitely want to hear from you if you have major concerns. So thank you for raising that. And Sarah, does that sound like that's the last question for now? For this,
I think
today?
so. Thank you so much, Becky.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I know we went a few minutes over. Sarah, thank you so much for moderating that Q&A, and most importantly, thank you to you all for asking all those questions. Just to reiterate what Sarah said, we will try to work through all the questions that were not answered and make sure to share some information on our follow-up email tomorrow that goes out along with the other all the other materials that we've referenced. But just really appreciate your attention today and interest in the JMHCP program. As you're beginning to put together your ideas and you have additional questions, we are here to help and address those and talk through ideas. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and best of luck to you all. Thank you to my colleagues Maria and John for joining me on the webinar, but we will conclude now. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye now.